In 2018, something began to unsettle Londoners in their everyday lives, and it wasn't immediately clear just how big the problem would become. It started with occasional reports of stolen smartphones, something the city had always dealt with in the background of its bustling streets. A commuter leaving a train at King's Cross would suddenly find their phone missing. A tourist in Oxford Street would feel a sudden tug and realize the device was gone. A student sitting in a quiet cafe in Shoreditch would have their phone snatched off the table before they could react. These were small stories at first, the sort of incidents that usually never make it beyond a police log or an insurance claim. But as the weeks went on, the frequency grew, and soon the scale of it was impossible to ignore. The pattern was chilling in its simplicity. Almost every victim described the same method. Motorbikes or scooters mounted the pavements at terrifying speed. Riders in helmets swooping down on pedestrians, grabbing phones from hands, and vanishing before anyone could even register what had happened. Others reported coordinated pickpockets who worked in pairs, one creating a distraction while the other slipped the phone from a bag or pocket. Victims felt powerless, often left with nothing more than shock and frustration. For the police, these crimes posed a nightmare. They happened quickly, in crowded spaces, and the perpetrators melted into the city within seconds. By the middle of the year, the statistics were unlike anything London had seen before. Reports showed thousands of thefts every single month, with certain boroughs turning into red zones where walking with a phone in your hand meant almost certain risk. Insurance companies flagged massive increases in claims, and phone manufacturers themselves began noticing the pattern. What troubled investigators most was the value. These weren't cheap devices. Each smartphone was worth hundreds of pounds, sometimes more, and they could be resold or exported for nearly the same price as new. The numbers began to climb into the tens of millions. Analysts working inside the Metropolitan Police realized the problem wasn't a wave of petty thefts by opportunists. It was an organized system, carefully managed, with huge profit potential. Community fears deepened. Parents warned their children not to take phones out on the way to school. Professionals began leaving devices at home or keeping them hidden in coats. Tourists shared warnings online, describing London as a hotspot for lightning-fast robberies. The city's reputation was under quiet pressure, and behind the scenes, officers knew something larger was happening. The thefts didn't feel random anymore. They were too coordinated, too consistent, too profitable to be the work of unconnected individuals. Detectives started looking for hidden patterns, repeat areas, particular times of day, and unusual behaviors reported by witnesses. They noticed that some phones disappeared from tracking systems within hours, sometimes even minutes, suggesting advanced methods of wiping devices or shipping them abroad. The mystery of how so many could vanish so quickly unsettled even experienced officers. What they were seeing was not just crime, but something that resembled a pipeline. One that ran beneath the surface of London's daily life, invisible to the public yet steadily draining millions in stolen property. By the end of that year, when the figures were tallied, the scale was staggering. More than £50 million worth of phones had been stolen, a sum that rivaled some of the largest bank heists in modern British history. And yet no one could point to a single mastermind or a clear group responsible. The city was under attack, not from an obvious enemy, but from an invisible network that operated in shadows. The sense of unease was spreading, and the stage was being set for one of the most complex undercover investigations the Metropolitan Police would ever face. The rise of the Phantom Network did not happen overnight. Like many criminal organizations, it began with small-scale operations that appeared harmless compared to the scale of what would come. At first, it was groups of young men on scooters, working independently, taking advantage of the chaos of London's busiest streets. But as profits rolled in, someone began to see the potential. Scattered thieves became foot soldiers, and what had once been quick grabs turned into a machine designed to strip the city of its most valuable everyday possession. By the time police began connecting the dots, the Phantom Network had already grown into a shadow empire with layers of control. At the bottom of the structure were the riders, teenagers mostly, drawn in by fast money and the thrill of the chase. They were paid per phone, with bonuses for the most expensive models. For many, this was more than they could ever earn through part-time jobs or low-paid work, and the risk felt minimal. They wore helmets, their scooters were often stolen or unregistered, and within seconds of striking, they were gone. These youths didn't ask where the phones went after they handed them over. For them, the job ended the moment the device was passed on to a collector. The collectors were older, more disciplined, and far more important. They worked in safe flats scattered across London, where phones were sorted, cleaned, and stripped of anything that could connect them to their rightful owners. Software was used to wipe devices within minutes, and some were broken down for valuable parts. Others were prepared for shipment, packed carefully to look like harmless cargo. From there, they moved up another level to the middlemen. These individuals coordinated shipments through fake businesses or repair shops, import-export firms, and courier services that masked the true nature of what was being moved. A crate of what appeared to be refurbished electronics could actually contain hundreds of freshly stolen smartphones, each one worth hundreds on the black market. Above them sat the real power. The leaders of the Phantom Network were invisible figures who never touched a stolen phone themselves. They worked through trusted lieutenants, ensuring their hands remained clean while profits flowed upward. Meetings were rare, instructions were often passed through encrypted apps, and identities were kept deliberately vague. Detectives later discovered that many of these figures lived comfortably, driving luxury cars, wearing designer clothes, and dining in high-end restaurants. All while the teenagers doing the dirty work took the most visible risks. The international side of the operation was what made the Phantom Network unique. Stolen phones did not stay in London for long. Within days, sometimes even hours, they were shipped to markets in Eastern Europe, Africa, and Asia, where demand for premium smartphones was high. There, they could be sold for nearly full retail price, making the profits enormous compared to selling locally. Each phone that disappeared from a London pocket became part of a vast international trade, fueling a criminal economy that spanned continents. The ruthlessness of the operation lay in its efficiency. Victims were just numbers. Phones were categorized, processed, and shipped like factory goods. There was no emotion, no hesitation, only the constant drive for profit. By 2019, it was clear to investigators that almost every major phone theft in London could be traced back to this single network. Yet despite its size, the Phantom Network remained hidden from the public eye. There were no flashy displays of violence, no bold statements of power. Only the silent and steady draining of millions of pounds through a system so disciplined it resembled a corporate supply chain. For police, understanding the structure was one thing. Finding a way inside would be something else entirely. The decision to send someone undercover into the Phantom Network was not taken lightly. Years of intelligence gathering had revealed the size of the organization. But what police lacked was a clear picture of how it worked from the inside. Without that, any raid risked seizing only low-level thieves, while the leaders remained untouched. The job required someone who could disappear into the underworld without raising suspicion. Someone able to build trust in a world where betrayal was punished without hesitation? That person became known only as Agent K. His real name was hidden, even from many inside the force. Because one mistake could mean the end, not only of the operation but of his life. Agent K entered the network disguised as a courier willing to move stolen goods. At first, his role was small, carrying packages between collection points and keeping his head down. But in those early runs, he began to see the machinery of the Phantom Network at work. Flats and rundown tower blocks were stacked floor to ceiling with stolen devices. He saw cheap toolkits used to pry phones apart, machines capable of flashing new codes onto their systems, and laptops running programs that disabled tracking in minutes. Every location looked ordinary from the outside. Nothing more than another rented space in a city of millions, yet inside was a factory line of theft and laundering. The more he observed, the more the scale became undeniable. It wasn't just phones moving through the system. He discovered that fake businesses had been set up as front-seat electronics repair shops that rarely had customers. Import-export companies that filed convincing paperwork but never imported anything legitimate. These businesses laundered the proceeds, converting stolen goods into clean money that moved through banks like any other transaction. On paper, the Phantom Network appeared to be a thriving electronics distributor. In reality, it was one of the largest theft operations London had ever faced. Agent K reported back to the task force in secret debrief. Each new detail he provided widened the investigation. He described the hierarchy of the gang, noting how young riders rarely met the people they ultimately worked for. He drew maps of warehouses and identified vehicles used to move shipments across the city. He learned that every phone was logged, numbered, and tracked not by the victims who lost them, but by the gang itself, who treated each device as inventory. The network ran like a business, its efficiency designed not just to steal, but to profit without waste. The danger was constant. Suspicion ran deep among members of the organization. They trusted few, and newcomers were watched closely. Any sign of hesitation, any slip in behavior could end in discovery. The gang was known to deal ruthlessly with traitors, and stories circulated of individuals who had disappeared after falling out of line. Agent K carried this risk every day, yet his position within the courier chain gave him access no one in law enforcement had ever achieved. As months passed, he climbed slowly higher. Entrusted with larger deliveries and given glimpses of the men who pulled the strings. He learned about their encrypted communications, their international contacts, and the financial structures that moved millions across borders. What he uncovered was shocking, even to experienced investigators. The thefts were only one part of a far bigger machine. The Phantom Network was tied to forged passports, stolen identities, and credit card fraud, all funded by the endless supply of stolen phones. What had begun as street crime had become an empire, and every detail Agent K uncovered brought police one step closer to tearing it apart. Just as the investigation was gathering enough strength to close in, the unexpected happened and shifted everything. 4 months, the Phantom Network had operated without challenge, but greed in the criminal underworld rarely stays contained. A rival group, smaller but ambitious, attempted to hijack one of the Phantom's largest shipments at Heathrow Airport. The shipment, worth millions in stolen devices, was supposed to pass quietly through disguised paperwork. Instead, armed men intercepted it, creating a storm of violence that spilled into the headlines. Suddenly, the underworld was alive with whispers. The Phantom Network, once seen as untouchable, appeared vulnerable. This chaos became an opening for police. Surveillance teams already had the gang under close watch, and the attempted hijacking revealed tensions no one had seen before. Rivalries that had been hidden began to surface, and for the first time, cracks appeared in the network SE perfect phasagy. Agents monitoring encrypted communications picked up fragments of angry exchanges. After the 2008 financial crash, his career collapsed, and debts mounted. Instead of starting over, he built a criminal career, using his knowledge of finance to design sophisticated laundering schemes for the Phantom Network. He knew how to hide money, how to make transactions look legitimate, and how to turn millions in dirty profits into untouchable wealth. His polished background had given the network an edge that no ordinary street gang could match. But there was more. Digging deeper, surveillance units uncovered links between the Phantom Network and passport traffickers. One of the organization's trusted middlemen was moving not only phones, but entire packages of stolen identities. Passports, driver's licenses, and forged documents were exchanged alongside smartphones, feeding international fraud rings. This meant the gang's activities stretched well beyond London's streets. They weren't simply exporting stolen goods. They were helping to fuel global crime. Then came the twist no one inside the task force had predicted. A senior lieutenant within the Phantom Network, long thought to be one of its most loyal enforcers, was revealed to be secretly communicating with police, out of fear for his own safety, or perhaps to secure his own freedom. He had begun feeding investigators critical intelligence. He had been part of the network's rise, ensuring shipments left the city smoothly. But as rivals circled and violence threatened, he decided to protect himself. In exchange for immunity, he provided information that pierced through the organization's defenses. This betrayal was the breakthrough. He revealed storage sites, described internal rivalries, and even supplied details of a shipment worth nearly £10 million scheduled to leave London in days. For investigators, this was gold. After years of chasing shadows, they now had precise intelligence from a man who knew the Phantom Network from the inside. It meant the chance to strike not just at couriers or middlemen, but at the very heart of the empire. The police realized the time to act was approaching. The network had survived years of surveillance and raids on minor players. But now, with insiders turning against it and rivals tearing at its edges, its days were numbered. The raids began before dawn, on one of the coldest mornings of the year. London was still wrapped in darkness, when convoys of unmarked vans rolled silently through the streets. More than 300 officers were spread across the city, each unit briefed with exact instructions. Timing was everything. If even one target slipped away, shipments could be lost and years of work undone. At precisely 4 o'clock, the signal was given, and doors were forced open in coordinated strikes that unfolded like clockwork. The first warehouse fell quickly. Officers stormed inside expecting resistance, but what they found stunned even the most seasoned detectives. The interior resembled a distribution center. Rows of metal shelves stacked with sealed boxes, each one filled with stolen phones. By the time the count was finished, more than 20,000 devices had been recovered, their combined worth running into millions. Some boxes were already labeled for international shipping, with forged invoices attached that listed them as electronics parts. In another room, officers discovered laptops running programs designed to erase tracking data alongside machines capable of altering identification numbers. The warehouse was not just storage. It was a processing plant built to keep the stolen goods invisible. Across the city, other teams struck safe houses. Hidden behind plain doors and locked shutters were the luxury cars purchased with laundered money. False passports awaiting buyers and stacks of cash packaged in elastic bands. One property, disguised as a mobile phone repair shop, had a basement filled with counterfeit documents ready to be smuggled abroad. Each discovery reinforced how vast the Phantom Network's reach had become, but also how much it depended on secrecy. Without the undercover work and the betrayal from within, these places would have remained hidden. The leaders were caught completely off guard, accustomed to operating with layers of protection. They had never imagined police would know their locations with such accuracy. Some were pulled from beds in high-rise apartments, others arrested in offices where they kept the appearance of legitimate business. For years, they had presented themselves as untouchable figures who gave nothing away. But the sudden sweep of arrests left them powerless. They were not dragged down by force alone, but by the very structure they had built, turned against them by the intelligence gathered at every level of their chain. In court, the scale of the operation became clear to the public for the first time. Prosecutors laid out how the Phantom Network had drained more than £50 million from the city. How thousands of victims had been left, not only financially harmed, but cut off from their personal lives, stored inside their stolen devices. Testimony from the undercover officer revealed the discipline of the gang, their factory-like system, and their ability to vanish goods within hours. The betrayal of their lieutenant was kept largely in the shadows, but it was his information that had delivered the final blow. When sentences were handed down, the leaders faced decades behind bars, their fortunes seized and their network dismantled. The teenagers who had once roamed the streets on scooters found themselves without employers. Their easy money gone overnight. Phone thefts across the city fell sharply in the months that followed, and while some small gangs tried to fill the gap, none possessed the Phantom Network's organization or scale. For London, the operation was hailed as one of the most significant blows against organized crime in recent memory. What had begun as scattered thefts had grown into an empire, and what seemed unstoppable had been broken in a single day. Yet behind the headlines, investigators knew the victory came at a price. Years of danger, an undercover life lived in constant fear, and the betrayal of criminals by their own ranks had all been necessary to bring it down. The Phantom Network vanished into history, but its story remained a reminder of how organized crime can thrive in silence until someone is brave enough to step inside and pull it apart from within.